Welcome to today's Explainer. We've got a really fascinating task ahead of us today. We're going to visually decode the massive, deeply complex history of the Hebrew Bible. But instead of getting lost in the thousands of pages, we're zooming way out. We want to map out the grand, repeating macro pattern that literally drives this entire narrative forward. Okay, let's dive right into this. To keep things grounded, we're using a specific foundational text today, the Nueva Biblia de las Americas, published by Editorial Vida. We'll be using this specific Spanish-language translation to objectively explore the historical and poetic compilations it contains. The goal here is to translate its overarching, massive concepts into a really clear framework that any of us can grasp. And to make sense of this sprawling compilation, we've organized it into a digestible 5-part map. Number 1, the ancient biblical narrative. 2, establishing the covenant. 3, the cycle of rebellion. 4, prophets, kings, and consequences. And finally, 5, the promise of restoration. So, kicking things off with Section 1, the ancient biblical narrative, mapping the eras of the text. Because to truly understand the macro pattern here, we first need to see the chronological flow. Our source text maps out 4 very distinct historical eras. First up, we've got the patriarchs in Genesis, the foundational families. Then comes the Exodus era, which covers the epic escape from Egypt and those long desert wanderings you find detailed in Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. Following that is the incredibly volatile period of the Judges. And then finally, the text transitions into the monarchy, the era of kings recorded in the books of Samuel and Kings. This timeline right here, this is basically the track upon which our entire narrative runs. Moving right along to our second section, establishing the covenant, the foundation of the relationship. The entire biblical narrative we just mapped out hinges on one pivotal agreement established at Mount Sinai. Let's look at the terms. Here's a quote from Exodus 19:5. "Now then, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be my own possession among all the peoples." Notice that word, if. The text explicitly describes a highly conditional relationship between God and the Israelites. The whole foundation is built entirely on obedience to a very specific set of rules. So what exactly are those rules? Well, in Deuteronomy 5, Moses outlines the terms of this covenant, familiarly known to most of us as the 10 Commandments. And these range from exclusive loyalty, meaning no other gods, straight through to a strict moral baseline for the community. No murder, no theft, no false witness. These statutes form the legal and moral constitution of the entire nation. And this brilliantly illustrates the high stakes of that constitution. In chapters like Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28, the text presents a stark, unavoidable dichotomy. On one side, immense blessings, prosperity, health, and security for obedience. But on the other side, devastating 7-fold curses for rebellion, eventually culminating in the ultimate threat, being exiled from their land. The rules of the game are absolutely set. Which brings us to Section 3. The cycle of rebellion, the loop of human nature. Because once these rules are established, the text immediately reveals a tragic flaw in human nature, mapped out most overtly in the book of Judges. I want you to pay close attention to this 4-step historical loop, because it is literally the engine of the narrative. Step 1, the Israelites fall into sin and idolatry, instantly breaking that very first commandment. Step 2, as a result, they're oppressed by foreign enemies, kings like Cushan-Rishathaim. Step 3, under this crushing oppression, they finally cry out for help. And Step 4, a judge or deliverer, like Othniel or Ehud, is raised up to save them. The land gets peace, everything is great, and then they go right back to Step 1. And the text doesn't let this cycle go unnoticed either. In Judges chapter 2, the narrative actually uses divine messengers to confront the people. The angel at Bochim states it clearly, "I will never break my covenant with you, but you have not obeyed me. What is this you have done?" It sets up this continuous, grinding tension between divine faithfulness on one hand and inevitable human failure on the other. Let's zoom in on a specific microstory for a second, just to see how deep this flaw really runs. In Judges 6, the deliverer Gideon is tasked with destroying an altar to the idol Baal. But out of immense fear of his own family and community, he actually has to do it secretly under the cover of night. It shows us that even the so-called deliverers were heavily compromised. They were operating in a culture completely steeped in this cycle of rebellion. That fatal cycle leads us perfectly into Section 4, prophets, kings, and consequences. Eventually, the Israelites transition out of the era of the judges and establish a monarchy. But as we'll see, a new system of government did absolutely nothing to solve the underlying loop of rebellion. If anything, it escalated it. The source material is remarkably objective about the corruption of its own leaders across generations. I mean, we see Eli's sons corrupting the sacred priesthood in 1 Samuel. We see King David's grievous moral failures involving Bathsheba and Uriah. We see King Jeroboam setting up completely illicit altars, and King Ahaziah literally sending messengers to consult a foreign god, Baal-zebub, regarding his health. The leadership is just as trapped in the cycle as the common people. What's truly fascinating here is how the text masterfully weaves this grand macro history with intense, visceral micro-tragedies. This quote, "This is King David's heartbroken, agonized cry over his treasonous son Absalom, who was killed after trying to usurp the throne." The rebellion isn't just national, it's personal, it's familial, and it carries a really heavy emotional toll. Now, during this era, because the kings were failing so miserably, a new role emerges: the prophet. The narrative uses figures like the prophet Nathan to confront the absolute power of the monarchy. When David sins, Nathan doesn't just yell at him. He uses a brilliant, poignant parable about a rich man stealing a poor man's only beloved lamb. The prophets essentially act as the conscience of the nation, constantly demanding adherence back to that original Sinai covenant. But tragically, the warnings are ultimately ignored. The cycle hits its devastating breaking point. As documented in Kings 17, the ultimate consequence arrives. Because the nation continually sinned and revered other gods, they are conquered and exiled. Those terrifying curses we saw outlined earlier in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, they finally manifest in a total national collapse. The cycle has seemingly ended in pure destruction. However, the story doesn't end in the ashes. We arrive at our final section, the promise of restoration, hope beyond the exile. Despite the grim historical reality of the exile, the source text embeds a profound, enduring promise of a future. Notice the language in Deuteronomy 30. "If you return to the Lord your God, then the Lord your God will restore you from captivity and have compassion on you." Even from the absolute rock bottom of exile, the text provides a pathway back, provided, of course, the people return with all their heart and soul. So the crucial point is this: the narrative introduces the concept of a remnant. As seen in 2 Kings 19, the prophet Isaiah casts a vision for King Hezekiah of a surviving remnant of Judah. He uses this beautiful agricultural imagery, saying they will take root downward and bear fruit upward. A hopeful future is destined to sprout right from the ruins of the shattered nation. Which leaves us with a really profound, lingering question as we wrap up today. We've mapped the timeline, the covenant, the cycle of rebellion, the fall of kings, and the promise of a remnant. But looking at the entirety of this narrative, we have to ask, will this ancient cycle of rebellion and consequence ever truly be broken? Or is that surviving remnant just destined to repeat the loop all over again? It's a brilliant, unresolved tension built right into the text, inviting all of us to reflect deeply on the enduring nature of human history. Thank you so much for exploring this ancient narrative cycle with me. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we will see you in the next explainer.